Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people are interested in, conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
We got a ton of sources from all of you about this topic, and I gotta say, some of this stuff was pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. It's a fascinating area, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean, we've got like this really in-depth scholarly paper by Sunstein and Vermeule.
right.
We've got the Wikipedia entry for conspiracy theory, like just the
Of
classic.
course. Yeah.
And we've even got this guide from the European Commission
Wow.
on how to spot conspiracy theories.
Oh, wow.
So we've got a lot of different perspectives here.
I mean, everyone listening probably has like some idea about conspiracy theories or like has heard of them before, right? But like, have you ever thought about like why people believe them?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Like what makes them tick?
It's not just because people love mysteries.
Right.
Like all of our sources seem to suggest that there's like a really deep psychological component to this kind of thinking. Yeah, like humans are kind of like hardwired to like see patterns,
Uh-huh.
even when there aren't any there.
Yeah.
Think about it. Have you ever looked at the clouds and seen a face or a shape?
Oh, yeah, totally.
That's like your brain trying to like make sense of all this like random information.
Yeah.
And it's that same impulse that can make us vulnerable to conspiracy theories.
So it's like our brains are just playing like this cosmic game of connect the dots, even
Yeah.
when we're talking about like, really complex or like even tragic events.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of apophenia comes in.
Apophenia.
Yeah, it's this like tendency to see like meaningful connections
Okay.
where there really aren't any.
Interesting.
And Sunstein and Vermeule talk about this in their paper, and it's really important to like understanding how conspiracy theories take root
Okay.
because like our brains crave order and control,
Uh-huh.
especially when we're faced with something that's like really frightening or confusing.
Right. Like if you're feeling powerless or anxious, like clinging to a theory, even if it's like way out there,
Uh-huh.
can like give you a sense of control.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like saying, I know what's really going on even if everyone else doesn't.
Right?
It's like you have the secret decoder ring to reality.
Yeah. And that feeling can be so powerful
Totally.
that like even when you show someone like evidence
Yeah.
that contradicts what they believe,
Mhm.
they might actually see it as like proof of a cover up.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Sunstein and Vermeule call like crippled epistemology.
Crippled epistemology.
Yeah, it's like a way of thinking
Hmm.
where like any evidence against your theory
Okay.
actually just makes your belief stronger.
Have you ever like argued with someone like that?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Where it's like anything you say, they're like, no, that just proves it even more.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah, it's like they have this like mental firewall.
That's a great way to put
It
it.
just like deflects any facts that don't fit into their like narrative.
It is.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is this tendency to cling to your beliefs even when there's evidence against them.
Yeah.
It's not just with conspiracy theories. We
Right.
see this everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Like politics, religion, even like personal relationships.
So it's like we're all susceptible to this, like on some level.
To some degree, yeah.
It's not just like those, out there folks.
Right. We all have our biases,
Right.
and we all tend to prefer information that like confirms what we already believe.
Yeah.
But it's like with conspiracy theories,
Okay.
those biases can get like amplified
Mhm.
because they often tap into like our deepest fears and anxieties.
That makes sense. Like those theories give people like a scapegoat,
Totally.
for all these complex problems, like
Yeah.
a way to simplify things and feel like they have a grasp on a chaotic world.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand the psychology behind this kind of thinking.
Yeah.
You can't just like dismiss people as crazy or irrational.
Right.
You have to address the needs and anxieties that make these theories so appealing.
So like how do we do that?
Right.
How do we even like have these conversations without accidentally making things worse?
Yeah.
Because like, this European Commission guide is warning us
Yeah.
that like these theories can actually be super harmful.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a discussion for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we get there, what has stood out to you so far?
I think honestly the thing that like really surprised me was just this idea
Yeah.
that our brains are basically designed to see patterns even when they aren't there.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how vulnerable we all are to misinformation,
It really does.
especially when it confirms what we already believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a reminder that critical thinking
Yeah.
is more important now than ever.
Totally.
You can't just passively take in information anymore.
Right.
You have to like question it,
Yeah.
evaluate the sources,
Mm-hmm.
and be willing to like change your mind
Yeah.
when there's new evidence.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we talked about like the psychology behind like believing in conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah.
But this European Commission guide you brought in,
Yeah.
it's saying that these theories,
Uh-huh.
like they can actually be dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's easy to just think of them as harmless,
Right.
but they can have real consequences.
Absolutely. Like the guide gives some pretty stark examples of where conspiracy theories have led to actual harm.
Oh.
Like take the anti-vaccine movement,
Yeah.
the idea that like vaccines are dangerous or like part of some government plot.
Yeah, it's a classic one.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's led to a decline in vaccination rates
Oh, wow.
in some areas, which in turn leads to outbreaks of diseases that are completely preventable.
Oh, gosh.
So there's like a direct link
Right.
between a conspiracy theory
Mm-hmm.
and a negative impact on public health.
Wow, yeah, it's like a reminder that like ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
It's not just about health either, right?
No.
Like the guide also mentions climate change denial. This idea that like climate change is a hoax or a conspiracy.
Totally.
And that can like stop us from addressing this huge threat to the planet.
It's like it creates this like false sense of security
Right.
and it leads to inaction on these really important issues.
And then there's like the role of conspiracy theories in politics, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like they can contribute to violence and unrest.
It's a real problem. And it's really scary when you think about it,
Yeah.
when people believe that they are fighting against this like all-powerful enemy.
Uh-huh.
It can make them think it's okay to do extreme things.
Right.
I mean, we've seen this with like harassment and threats
Yeah.
against public figures,
Totally.
even acts of violence.
So, like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Because we talked about how, like, if you just try to debunk these theories with facts,
Yeah.
it can backfire and make
Yeah.
people believe them even more.
It can.
So, like, how do you even approach these conversations?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
It feels like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
But Sunstein and Vermeule actually proposed this like kind of controversial approach.
Oh,
They call it cognitive infiltration.
cognitive infiltration.
Yeah, it's like the idea of planting seeds of doubt
Okay.
without actually directly confronting the person.
So instead of being like, you're wrong and here's why,
Yeah.
you could be like, have you considered this?
Yeah, or like, what if the evidence points in a different direction?
Right.
The point isn't to like win the argument
Yeah.
or to make them change their mind immediately.
Okay.
It's just to introduce a little bit of doubt,
Okay.
to make them question their own assumptions.
It's like a gentle nudge
Yeah,
towards critical thinking.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But remember, like this approach has to be used ethically
Of course.
and with empathy.
Right.
You're not trying to manipulate people or trick them.
Right. It's about empowering them to think for themselves.
Totally.
Yeah.
To look at the information critically
Uh-huh.
and come to their own conclusions.
But sometimes maybe the best thing to do is just disengage.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the best you can do.
Especially if someone's like really dug in
Uh-huh.
and they won't listen to any other perspective.
Right, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah, exactly.
But even if you can't change someone's mind directly,
Yeah.
you can still like be a good example of critical thinking
Right.
and encourage other people
Yeah.
to be more discerning about the information they consume.
I think that's a good point. Like, we can all play a part in building a society that's less susceptible to misinformation.
Yeah.
But it's tough, you know?
It is.
Like today with the internet and everything, it's
Yeah.
like we're constantly bombarded with information.
Right.
It's so hard to know what's real and what's not.
It's information overload.
Totally.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own biases
yeah.
and to be skeptical.
Uh-huh.
Don't just believe everything you read or hear,
Right.
especially if it's coming from sources that have a clear agenda.
Right. Or a history of spreading like misinformation.
Exactly.
It all goes back to critical thinking.
It really does.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all practice and get better at.
Yeah.
It's about asking questions,
Mm-hmm.
evaluating your sources,
Right.
thinking about different perspectives,
Totally.
and being willing to change your mind
Yeah.
when you see new evidence.
And it's like we're all detectives in a way,
Yeah.
trying to figure out the truth from all these clues.
Totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes those clues can lead us down some pretty strange paths.
Well, speaking of strange paths,
Yeah.
I think we should talk about some of the most famous and long-lasting conspiracy theories out there.
All game.
Like, as much as they can be harmful,
Yeah.
they're also fascinating.
Totally.
So where should we start?
Well, I think we got to start with the big one,
Okay.
the assassination of JFK.
Yeah, there's just something about that event
Right.
that keeps captivating people
Yeah.
and fueling all these theories.
It's like history itself is a mystery novel.
Right.
You have this young, charismatic president
Mm-hmm.
killed in his prime,
Right.
and the official story just leaves all these unanswered questions.
Yeah.
It's the perfect environment for
Mm.
speculation and alternative narratives.
Like, we can't accept that something so big
Mm.
could happen in such a random and senseless way,
I know what I mean.
you know?
Yeah.
Like, we need there to be a deeper meaning,
Right.
a hidden hand controlling everything.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It shows how much we as humans need to find order and meaning
Yeah.
in a world that often feels chaotic.
Totally.
And when there's no clear explanation,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to come up with our own.
Right. And those explanations
Yeah.
usually fit with what we already believe.
It
Like, we're hardwired to create our own narratives,
Yeah.
our own versions of reality,
is true.
even if they're not actually based on evidence.
And the JFK assassination is like the perfect example of this.
Totally.
I mean, there are so many different theories,
Right.
each one with its own set of facts.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to tell what's true and what's not.
And that's part of why these theories are so interesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
they offer us a sense of certainty, like a solution to the puzzle,
Right.
even if it's just an illusion.
Yeah, we want closure,
Yeah.
even if it means sacrificing accuracy or objectivity.
So, if we're going to talk about the JFK conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
what are like the main things that people point to?
Well, the most common idea
Okay.
is that Lee Harvey Oswald,
Yeah.
the guy who supposedly shot Kennedy,
Right.
he was either part of a bigger conspiracy
Uh-huh.
or a patsy.
Right. And that's where things get really wild.
Oh, yeah.
Because depending on who you believe, the list of suspects is like
Yeah.
everyone who is important in the Cold War,
Totally.
the CIA, the Mafia, Fidel Castro, the Soviet Union,
Right.
even Lyndon B. Johnson.
It's like a real-life game of Clue
Right.
with, like, global stakes.
Yeah.
And each theory has its own little clues
Right.
and interpretations.
Yeah, it makes it really hard to know what's real
It really does.
and what's not.
What's amazing is that even after all this time
Yeah.
and all these investigations,
Yeah.
people are still coming up with new JFK theories.
It's like a cultural Rorschach test.
Yeah,
Like, people project their own beliefs and anxieties
totally.
onto this event,
Yeah.
creating stories that fit with their worldview.
It's so true. And that's why we have to look at these theories critically.
Yeah. Right.
It's easy to get caught up in the mystery and the drama. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
these are just theories,
Right.
not facts.
Are there any of those theories that stand out to you?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think for me,
Yeah.
it's the idea that the moon landing was faked.
The moon landing?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Like, that one really gets me thinking.
It does seem kind of crazy at first.
It does.
Right. Like, we've all seen the footage,
Uh-huh.
the pictures of Neil Armstrong taking that giant leap for mankind.
I know.
But then when you start looking at the details,
Yeah.
like all the supposed inconsistencies,
Good.
you can see how someone might start to doubt the official story.
Especially in a world where we're surrounded by fake news and photoshopped images.
Right.
It makes you wonder what's real anymore.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes the moon landing hoax so appealing. Like, it taps into this deep distrust of authority, of governments and institutions.
Right.
Like, what if everything we've been told is a lie?
Yeah. It's a big what if.
Yeah,
And that distrust just gets worse with social media.
of course.
Because that's where misinformation spreads like crazy.
So what are some of the things that moon landing hoax believers point to?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
Like the flag waving in a vacuum.
Right?
The lack of stars in the photos.
Huh?
The shadows that some people say look like they were made with artificial lights.
Mm.
And then there are the more out there theories.
Like what?
Like the idea that Stanley Kubrick,
The film director.
helped fake the whole thing.
Wow, that's like next level.
It is.
Yeah.
But to be fair,
Mm.
there are totally reasonable explanations
Right.
for most of these supposed anomalies.
Yeah.
Like, scientists and experts have debunked these claims over and over, but people still believe the theories.
It's like our desire to believe something
right.
can be stronger than our logic.
I think you're right.
And that's what makes conspiracy theories so interesting,
Yeah.
but also so dangerous.
It's a tough balance.
Totally.
It's a reminder that we always have to be questioning things,
Mm,
challenging our own biases.
right.
And speaking of challenges,
Yeah.
In our next segment, we're going to dive into some strategies
Okay.
for how to identify and deal with conspiracy theories
Cool.
in a way that encourages critical thinking
Hmm.
instead of reinforcing harmful beliefs.
So we're going to give our listeners the tools they need
Yeah,
to navigate this crazy information landscape.
that's the plan.
Okay, so we've talked about like why people believe in these theories, and we've looked at some of the big ones out there like JFK and the moon landing. But like now I think we need to talk about like how do we deal with this stuff? Like how do we know what to trust when there's just so much information out there?
It's tough, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But remember how we talked about crippled epistemology? That thing where people see any evidence against their theory as proof of a cover-up? Well, we can actually use that to our advantage
Wow.
by flipping it on its head. Instead of assuming everything's a conspiracy, we should be skeptical everything, like question everything. Yeah. Especially stuff that seems too good to be true.
Yeah.
Or too perfectly aligned with what you already believe.
So basically don't just believe everything you read online.
Exactly. And that's where those red flags from the European Commission Guide come in, like those sensationalized claims, the demonizing language, the emotional anecdotes instead of facts. Those are all signs to be careful.
It's like being a detective, right?
Yeah.
Looking for clues and inconsistencies.
Exactly. You got it. And speaking of sources, think about where you're getting your information from. Are you getting it from different places? Like, are you reading different news sources? Are you listening to different perspectives, even ones you might not agree with?
Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in an echo chamber where everyone's just saying the same thing.
Totally. And if you do find something that seems really interesting or really crazy, take a minute to fact check it. There are tons of websites and organizations that are dedicated to debunking misinformation and checking facts.
Like Snopes and factcheck.org, right?
Exactly. Those are great examples.
Mhm.
And remember, even if a conspiracy theory seems harmless, it can still have real consequences.
Oh, yeah, like what about all the misinformation that spreads during elections?
Exactly. That can directly affect how people vote and what happens in the future.
It's like we all have a responsibility to be informed and to think critically about what we read and share online.
Absolutely. Now, what about when you meet someone who's really into a conspiracy theory? How do you talk to them without making things worse?
Well, we talked about cognitive infiltration before, right? Like planting seeds of doubt without directly challenging them.
Exactly. It's all about asking open-ended questions that get them thinking. Instead of saying, that's ridiculous, you could ask, what makes you think that? Or, is there any evidence that could change your mind?
It's about like meeting them where they are and listening to them.
Exactly. And empathy is super important. People who believe in conspiracy theories often feel like they're the only ones who know the truth, or like no one's listening to them. So being compassionate and understanding can make a big difference.
So it's not about winning an argument. It's about helping people learn to think for themselves.
Exactly. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just show them how to think critically. Be a good example yourself. Show them that it's okay to question things and to change your mind when you learn something new.
It's like showing them that being open-minded and curious is more important than just blindly believing something.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of conspiracy theories, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest thing is to take responsibility for the information you consume. Like, be careful about your sources, check your facts, and don't be afraid to question what you believe.
Well said.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself getting drawn into a conspiracy theory, take a step back and ask yourself, why am I drawn to this? What need is this filling for me? Am I looking for control? A simple explanation. Or maybe even a sense of belonging. Understanding those things can help you navigate these ideas more carefully.
It's a journey of self-discovery as much as it is about understanding the world.
Mm.
So here's a final thought. If conspiracy theories show our anxieties and uncertainties, what does their popularity say about our society today? Something to think about.
It is. It's a conversation that needs to continue.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay skeptical.